Welcome back to the basketball show on this Linda Ronstadt morning. Paul Sir, Ryan Reed joining you today. We're going to jump into an interview I did early in the week. I believe it was Monday with Ben Golliver, and it was actually before game one of the Timberwolves and Golden State Warriors in the second round. And some of the material is, of course, a bit dated, but I thought a great place to start was my discussion with Ben at the time about the Wolves team and the strange sort of season they had trying to get the team to fit together. And we talk about Julius Randle, who has been a major part of that confusion, but also is a big part of the potential solution. So here's our conversation, starting with our conversation about Julius Randle.
Randle gives them that old school back to the basket presence you don't see too often anymore in the NBA. But boy, is it hard to guard.
Well, one of the most fascinating developments about the Minnesota Timberwolves, and I don't think a lot of people saw this coming after they made the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, is that they have almost completely weaned themselves off of the low efficient long two shots. And if you remember back to earlier in Anthony Edwards' career, and throughout Julius Randle's career, those guys have really leaned heavily on the long twos. And all the basketball coaches and the analytics dorks will all tell you, Paul, you got to get layups, paint points, free throws, and three-pointers. Don't shoot the long twos, right? And so for Minnesota, they were kind of fighting a losing math battle for a while with their main guys. And because Rudy Gobert isn't really a scoring threat, they come into this season thinking, well, they're going to have all sorts of spacing problems. They're not going to be able to score enough and not be efficient enough. And against the Lakers, there was multiple games that they won, and they scored more than 100 points as a team, and they didn't even have a single long two for a score the entire game. And so that tells you that they have really committed to a more modern offensive approach. And so what that's meant is more three-pointers for Anthony Edwards, cut out the long twos, and for Julius Randle, it's exactly like what you said. Back to the basket, but then also bulldozing from the elbow, bulldozing from the wing, get yourself all the way to the rim, get fouled, put that physical pressure on the opposing team's front line. That's how you need to be scoring. Don't be settling for these bad shots. He really took that to heart against the Lakers. It wasn't always perfect, but sometimes, Julius Randle's best games are a little bit ugly, and he had a couple of ugly good games against the Lakers. One thing to watch here is the frontline size issue. That's why Randle was feasting against the Lakers, because they didn't have a center. They didn't even play Jackson Hayes because he just was incompetent. He couldn't get it done. And so Randle had a lot of room to operate going downhill against that Lakers defense, and he really found success. Now, the Warriors, they're also small. They like to go with Draymond Green at center, who's still an incredible defensive player of the year level defender. But the Warriors, by and large, are going to be small too. And so that creates an opportunity for Randle to do the same bulldozing type offense. What I do like about this Warriors defense, though, is they're very handsy. They're very good at steals. They're very good at blocks. When they're locked in, they scramble around a lot. They'll make you think. And that's really how they took apart that Houston offense in Game 7. It was a lot of block shots from their guards from behind. There was a lot of team rebounding, gang rebounding. And so the Warriors are really going to need to have that same defensive approach to slow down a guy like Randle, who's so good going to the basket. And the last guy we should mention, too, is McDaniels for Minnesota. He's Absolutely. A very long, athletic forward. He's a release valve guy. You don't count on him for 20 points a night, but he absolutely killed the Lakers because he was able to just keep cutting to the basket, get dunks, and put pressure downhill. And so Minnesota is going to want to see the same thing from him as well when they try to go against Golden State.
Talking to Ben Golliver from the Washington Post here on the Deep Dive on the Basketball Show. Ben, really good points, I think, all the way through. I'd like to point out why, to me, Steph Curry is Mozart personified in a basketball body.
So let's hear it.
The first night, the first overture was he didn't score. He hardly scored. I think he had 3 points at halftime. But he was so effective. And, of course, like as you mentioned, getting Buddy Hield the shots. And Buddy stepped up. I mean, he was in his zone. He was ready mentally, physically, and he got wide open looks. When you watch shooters, once they get their confidence, all of a sudden the hoop looks like it's the size of a rain barrel. It's humongous. It's a golf green, not a golf hole. And Buddy Hield was ready for that. But Curry made it happen. He did not force. I have to say, I rarely tweet during a game, but my pressure valve kind of got released because I was frustrated with Steve Kerr in the way that the second half was starting to unfold, because Curry was still deferring to others, and players that shouldn't be taking all the shots for the Warriors were taking all the shots. But then I'm coming out of one of the timeouts, Curry started being Curry and hit those outrageous threes, those magnificent drives, while still being effective as a passer. It was, the second overture was just pure magic in the second half. How he took the Rockets apart, broke their hearts, shattered their confidence. I mean, the way the shoulders slumped on the Rockets team was incredible to watch, and you really had to boil that down to Steph Curry's mastery of the game.
And mastery of his body, too. I mean, the aerobic capacity for him, I guess maybe it's Kentucky Derby weekend this past weekend, so that's why I'm thinking about it. But I remember learning about Secretariat, the famous racehorse, who just apparently had a heart that was like 2 or 3 times bigger than all the other horses. It was just, one of those freak genetic things. And so he could just run longer and faster than anybody else could. And that's where Steph Curry still is at. I mean, he's unbelievably conditioned. And Amen Thompson, who's got to be in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year this year, cramped up in Game 7 because he was trying to chase Curry around, even though Curry is 15 years older than him, right? So not only is he hitting those amazing shots, but he's working so hard to even get the ball because they were face guarding him, doing all these crazy junk zone defenses on him, boxes and ones, and he still found a way to get it done. So Mozart, I think, is a great comparison. He is a real virtuoso, and it's always nice to see. There's been a couple tough years for Golden State, right? After the championship, they have to lose Klay Thompson. They have a play-in tournament exit. I mean, things just kind of aren't going great for them. The Jimmy Butler trade kind of restored their hope. It restored their talent level. It told Steph Curry, hey, we're going to get you enough because we still believe in you. Go out there and do what you do. And when he left that court in Houston, he left it like a conquering hero, man. He was screaming. And in the ultimate sign of respect, the Rockets fans who had their hearts broken, like you described, they were there taking pictures and taking video of Steph Curry walking off the court because they wanted to have a souvenir to remember that pain. They want to be able to tell their kids, hey, man, I saw Steph Curry at his best, and he was pretty freaking good.
Well, and to your point, I mean, to be part of that history of the game, every time you watch Steph Curry, you're watching history being written day after day, night after night, game after game. The guy has redefined basketball, has, I think, propelled it. And you and I talked about this before, much more so than any other contemporary player, including LeBron James, into the future. The NBA looks the way it looks today because of Steph Curry. And with that note, I'm going to segue over to the Boston, to the Boston-New York game last night. I wasn't watching in the first half. I had other things I was doing. I glanced at it and I saw Boston was up 20, and I thought, well, history's repeating itself again. But then I started watching the score and I go, oh my gosh, I guess it's not. Boston's stats. This is the effect of Steph Curry when you can't shoot like Steph Curry. You're 15 for 60 from 3. You're taking 63s. In New York, they go 17 for 37. I mean, Boston we've said that. They live and die by the 3, along with being a very good team. But, man, live by the sword, die by the sword, huh?
Yeah, just to be clear, you said 6D, 6-0, not 16.
6-0, not 15 for 16. 1-5 for 6-0. You're right.
Yeah. All-time record for most missed three-pointers in a playoff game. And the Boston, the way they shoot it, I mean, they're going to be setting records whether they're hot or whether they're cold because they take so many of them. I thought this was a really big win for the New York Knicks, just for their confidence. All season long, the story was they can't beat the good teams. They got smoked by Boston every time they played them during the regular season, including on opening night, which kind of set the tone for the season. When the Knicks came through Los Angeles in March, unfortunately, Jalen Brunson had his ankle injury, but even if he wasn't injured, the confidence just really wasn't there. They didn't carry themselves like with the swagger of a championship team. They just felt like one of those teams that knew it was second tier and it wasn't going to be able to get over the hump. They didn't play very well against the Cavaliers, didn't play well against the Thunder. Like any good team they played, they got beat, right? So for them to go steal game 1 in TD Garden, I mean, that's almost like table stakes for them to try to win this series. Like they had to have something like that really go their way. Some clutch plays down the stretch in overtime, and then a great defensive stand right at the end where, Boston, they could have had 61 threes in the game attempted, but they couldn't even get a shot up on the final play. And I think a defensive-minded coach like Thibodeau, who's watching Mikal Bridges sort of harass Jaylen Brown on that final play, he's going to be very, very proud and very happy of that result because they were able to kind of escape there and preserve the victory. So for the Knicks, a lot to be thrilled about. It's going to be a long series. Boston has this habit of dropping games, left and right during the playoffs along their journeys that you always kind of feel like they shouldn't have lost. And I would add this one to that pile. I'm still going to take the Celtics in this series, but they got things to be worried about. Kristaps Porzingis leaves the game sick. Jaylen Brown has been dealing with some sort of a nagging knee injury. He keeps saying, "Hey, I'm okay," but he's not playing that well. Tatum, who I was convinced could not shoot worse than he did in last year's playoffs, so I thought he was going to have a huge playoff run this year as kind of a bounce back. He continues to leave me a little bit cold with his playoff performances this year, even though they were able to get through the first round pretty quickly. And then I think Drew Holiday's been banged up, and some other guys have been banged up too. So it just kind of feels like the Celtics are accumulating a lot of baggage here as they go, right? And so even if they take care of the Knicks, they have a long way to go to get through the Eastern Conference Finals and the finals. And I think it's very safe to say that this year's playoff run for Boston is going to be much more difficult than last year's.
I'm talking with Ben Golliver from the Washington Post here on the Deep Dive on the Basketball Show. Ben, I'm going to veer off the path a little bit right now because you mentioned about being a little cold towards Jason Tatum. Well, then what is your temperature with James Harden and the way he played in Game 7?
Well, here's the thing. James Harden is a big pinata. He's a punching bag. Everybody takes their swipes at him, and for good reason. I've now seen him turn in very bad playoff games for 4 different teams. The Houston Rockets, the Brooklyn Nets, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Clippers. I mean, it's just kind of the same story everywhere he goes. He's getting into an advanced stage of his career now where I don't think maybe the expectations should be for superstar play. He's not quite that guy anymore. I do want to give James Harden credit because he put them into that Game 7 with a great showing in Game 6 when they were facing elimination. Now, no one's going to remember that because they laid an egg so badly in Game 7, but he does deserve his credit for that. After, all those, comments aside, just to kind of be fair, where did he go? And the same thing with Kawhi Leonard, too. I think the big takeaway for this Clippers series is that they had their 2 stars healthy and they couldn't get out of the first round. So any dream that Kawhi Leonard is going to be leading you to the promised land, who's going to be able to, turn back the clock now that he's healthy and play like he did back in Toronto, it's fool's gold. It's never going to happen. He's not that player anymore. The gap between him and Jokic, he wasn't even as good as Aaron Gordon in this series, in my opinion, from start to finish. So let alone Jokic, the best player in the world. So I think that really puts a pretty hard ceiling on what the Clippers can do going forward. They just kind of feel like a team that will be happy to make the playoffs for the next couple of years. And they need to start thinking about what they look like after the Kawhi Leonard era, because I think, unfortunately, this Kawhi era is a bust. And look, Harden just came in as a Band-Aid, right? He was sort of the Paul George replacement, like the little transition type player. He is not a guy who's going to be able to, earn comparisons from you to Mozart or Beethoven. I don't think anybody's going to be saying that about James Harden at this stage of his career.
You can listen to the entire interview with Ben Golliver on my Deep Dive podcast. And again, they'll be posted after the show on Spotify. Make sure you listen to Ben because, as you can hear, the content is somewhat dated, but we really get into what players and teams are all about. And I think that's where that's where the nature of these discussions is so great, because you get Ben's perspective, because he's literally in almost every arena for all these games. He's sitting courtside, and he really delves into the weeds on what makes teams, players, coaches tick. So listen to the podcast. It will be time well spent. We're going to take a break right now, and when we come back, we're going to bring in Doug McLean. Doug and I do the play-by-play and color for the Edmonton Stingers, and we have for many years. We're going to talk about the Stingers' home opener tomorrow and the CEBL kicking off right here on the Basketball Show on your sports leader, Sports 1440. Linda Ronstadt morning on the Basketball Show. That'll be the day. Best voice of the 70s. And boy, love this music. Ryan, you're spinning it like a DJ.
I'm just doing as I'm told here, so.
Welcome to the big show this morning. Speaking of the big show, it just got bigger as we welcome in our next guest, Doug McLean, play-by-play voice of the Edmonton Stingers, Golden Bears, Pandas, Fishu basketball, 3x3, you name it. He broadcasts it. Doug, good morning.
Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
Doing great. Glad to have you with us today as we are on the eve of the 7th season. Can you believe it, Doug? 7 years of the Canadian Elite Basketball League. It's pretty darn exciting, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I know, and it's true. I mean, 7 years, it seems like it's kind of flown by, but it's, I think, a testament to where the game is at in Canada, and I think it continues to grow with, obviously they've added teams to the league. This season will be the longest they've ever had with 24 games now. So, yeah, it's great, and it's nice to have the Stingers back and the league back up and going.
Absolutely is. So tomorrow the tip-off is 4 o'clock against the rivals to the south. I'll be real kind here, Doug. The rivals to the south, the Calgary Surge. And, the history of the rivalry hasn't been overly kind, has it, to the Stingers?
No, it hasn't. I mean, Stingers have had some success, especially on the road against Calgary, but it's been, it's maybe tipped a little bit in favor of the Surge. And I know for Edmonton, they're looking to get off to a good start tomorrow. And, no better way than to do it against any team coming from Calgary. And I think for the Stingers, it'll be trying to set the tone tomorrow, not just for this rivalry, but I think for how they want their season to go.
So the other night, Doug, you and I were able to go over to Strathcona High School and watch the Stingers practice, have a chance to meet some of the players. I was only able to stay for about half an hour. What were your impressions? What were your first impressions of this team that Coach and GM Jordan Baker, Associate GM Steve Sir have put together for this year?
Yeah, the number one thing I think is they're going to be, just from watching practice, and again, you got to take that with a grain of salt. They've been together for just a few days, but I think they're a more athletic team. I think they're going to be able to play the style that Jordan Baker wants to play maybe a little more easily than the team we saw last year. I think they're going to be able to get up and down the floor. They're going to be a defense first, focus on how they play in their own defensive half court, and I think they've got longer players, more athletic players, and that's not to discredit who they had last year, but I just think they're going to be able to play the tempo that they want to play. And I thought at times last year they were able to play that style defensively, but they had a tougher time doing it at the offensive end. And I think they're going to be able to do that a little more effectively offensively, get out in transition. I'm still not sure how great an offensive team they're going to be. I mean, time will tell. But I think certainly their ability to get out in transition, and I think how they'll be able to play defensively will be at a higher athletic level than maybe we saw through stretches last year.
One of the things that the CEBL has to deal with, that's just a reality, given the timing of the season, is that very rarely do all teams start with their full roster for players that they have that they've actually signed. There are some key pieces that aren't here yet because their seasons overseas are ongoing, but you have to play with the hand that you're dealt with. Number one, it's next man up. Number two, always that way in sport. But I think it's a really tight, short training camp. But these are basketball players. These are pros. These are men. These are adults. What we've seen in the past, Doug, I think I'd be interested in your commentary on this, but I think what we're used to is not seeing a finished product out of the gate, but we are used to seeing a very competitive first game, aren't we?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, and your point is bang on. I think sometimes instinct almost takes over. And I mean, you played pro basketball, like you'll have a far better sense of this than I would. But I think in those early days, yeah, you're trying to get systems in. You're trying to get some level of structure to what you want your team to play. But I mean, if we had truth serum for Jordan Baker, I think he'd tell you that, look, at some point early in a season, just the sheer experience of these individuals as players, having played at high-level university in Canada or high-level college in the U.S. or some pro experience they've had, it's just instinct that takes over, and then you start to see the system piece come into play over the course of time. And the Stingers have a bit of an advantage. I think it's been their strength from really day one 7 years ago. It is really about some level of continuity that they bring. And there's 4 players that are going to be back this year, which I think will help them. But it does take some time. And we're going to see which team is more prepared tomorrow afternoon, and the one that maybe has enough structure in their game that they can lean on. But again, who's bringing the best athletes to the table that can just go. And oftentimes we found early in CEBL seasons, that's often what ends up happening.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum that the CEBL faces. I think you phrased that very well, Doug. And I think the Stingers have tried to address it by the continuity that you just described. I mean, we have a coaching staff made up of local coaches. They're not bringing G League coaches in. And you can make an argument either way, however you want to do that. But head coach now, Jordan Baker, was an all CEBL player. Heck, when you see Jordan coaching, he could still be out there playing very well for the Stingers, but he's chosen to go the coaching route and brings that experience for the league, not just his experience as an elite player, but for the league and how the league has to run. But you try to, there's always a lot of talk about building culture on a team. And one of the challenges for the CEBL is it's real hard to do that in a very, very short, tight season, especially with a short training camp. But the Stingers have, I think, prized that continuity and culture and made that a center point of building their team around that by bringing back a Nick Hornsby again, who is such a leader, and trying to find local players to integrate into the lineup. So that is definitely a strength of this organization, isn't it, Doug?
100%. And you took the words right out of my mouth in regards to Nick Hornsby. I think him being back is huge because, he's a player that's not going to knock your socks off with his offensive ability. He's not going to, control the paint defensively. He's not the fastest guy on the floor, but man, every single team anywhere in the world is going to want Nick Hornsby on their roster because he's a guy that does all of those things well. When you need some offense, he can probably provide it. When you need a big stop, he can do that. But you're right, he's a leader, and I think he's a guy that can bring in some level of continuity to what this roster needs. And I'll point to another player, and this was pointed out to us by some of the coaching staff the other day when we were at practice, but Hey Donald, who's a player who they drafted last year, played a little bit for them, not a lot. I think he got into 9 games a year ago for the Stingers. But if you had just dropped into practice the other day and didn't know anything different or anything about this team, he would have stood out not just because of his play on the floor, but I think because of just how he was trying to lead on the floor. And he's a guy that still actually has a year of eligibility left at Laurier in Ontario. But he's a guy that I think they can lean on too because he knows the systems a little bit, and he just looked like a leader on the floor. And with Elijah Miller not yet back as their starting point guard, Donald's probably going to get some significant floor time. But again, another layer of continuity that they bring in. And so you're not bringing back 8 or 9 guys. They're bringing back ultimately 4 that were with the team a year ago. But again, just that little bit can make a difference. Calgary only has 2. And we'll see tomorrow with how much of a difference that makes. But yeah, Hornsby, Donald, Aaron Rooms, I think will all make a difference in terms of just having had experience in the city, experience with the coaching staff, and we'll see how much that pays dividends for them starting tomorrow.
I'm talking with Doug McLean, the play-by-play voice of the Edmonton Stingers here on the Basketball Show on Sports 1440. Let's talk about some of the new players. You laid the foundation really well, Doug, with Nick and the other players that are coming back. But let's talk about some of the players that the Stingers are going to roll out tomorrow. One player that stands out to me, and having had a chance to talk with him the other day, Scotty Lindsay, has a lot of CEBL experience, has had a successful career as well in the G League and overseas too. I mean, he's a player. Back in 2022, he averaged almost 20 points a game for the Saskatchewan Rattlers. Last year, he averaged 13.5 points per game for a very good Winnipeg Sea Bears game. What do you think the impact of, speaking of scoring that I think you correctly laid out, how important is it to have someone not just with international experience, not just with G League and NCAA experience, but with actual CEBL experience, because the CEBL is a very unique basketball game?
Yep. No, I think you're right. I think he's a very important component to where this team is going to go, because one of the challenges that I think they had last year is they did have at times a tough time scoring, didn't necessarily have that go-to player that you could lean on. That they'd hope that would be Davion Warren. They'd hope that would be Jacob Evans. It never really materialized for them to the degree that they probably wanted. Brody Clark was probably one of their more consistent scorers. He decided to move on from his basketball career. So I think a player like Lindsay, who, as you mentioned, Paul, has good CEBL experience, I think so he'll understand maybe to a greater degree those early season challenges that can exist with trying to build some level of continuity. And you combine that with the fact that he'll be playing with a Devontae Bandu, who's a Mississauga native, played at Baylor, was out of that Baylor program the year before they won their NCAA title, but he's, again, got good experience at high levels, played on that Saskatchewan team with Lindsay back in 2022, actually led them in scoring that year, did Bandu with 17.5. So again, they've got, in 21, he led them with 17.5. So they've got players who have some familiarity with each other, but also some familiarity with the league. And Bandu's numbers dropped a little bit last year in Montreal, just at 8 a game, but I think they've got some guys there that can provide a level of scoring that maybe they didn't have last year. Cameron McGriff, another player who we'll see, he's a little bit banged up this week. We'll see if he plays for them tomorrow, but he's got some NBA experience, having spent 3 games with the Portland Trail Blazers back in 2022. Again, some G League experience. So some guys that have pedigree that we'll see if they can answer that key question that I'm always curious about. You're 10 seconds left, you're down by 1, where's the ball going? And I always worry about teams that don't have an answer to that question. So if they can answer that question with one of those 3 or somebody else, then I think they'll be in a better spot offensively than maybe they were a year ago.
I agree with you, Doug. And one of the key areas, along with scoring, that I'm most interested in, because I think the Stingers really struggled with this last year at some time. And you mentioned a couple of players, so I'm not going to go into specifics, but I think in a general overall tone, there were players that were being looked to really be not just highly productive, but leaders on the court in terms of effort that sometimes just frankly wasn't there. What struck me the other night, and of course, this is the honeymoon phase. Everybody's together. Everybody's trying to win favor with the coach, as all teams are. That's not a knock on anybody. But it's, if this team will go out and have a level of compete for 40 minutes with the athleticism they brought in, some of the experience that you've described, that I think will set the tone, not just for the team to start bonding and start coming together more quickly, but also to bond with the fans as well, because we all know fans love teams that work hard from start to finish.
Yeah, and especially in this city. I think you look at any of the franchises here, I think that's when, I think that's what people here tend to admire. And so I agree with you. And then, you already mentioned it earlier, but look at their head coach. I mean, he's the guy that, whether you're going back to his Alberta Golden Bear days or his pro days here with the Stingers, Jordan Baker was almost always the hardest working player on the floor. I mean, the talent that he brought was a huge bonus to that, obviously, but he was the hardest working player, and that's what he wants this team to be. And I agree with you. I think just watching the other day, and again, it's practice. You take it with a grain of salt because they're trying to do lots of things in a short period of time. But I thought the way they were moving up and down the floor, I thought the way they were competing at the defensive end, I thought the way they were communicating even at the defensive end, I think are signs that maybe this this team is a little bit more in the mold of what Baker wants. And again, the proof will be over the next few weeks if you start to see that. But I think it's a team that isn't necessarily going to have a star or two, and you can argue if that's good or bad. But I think it's going to be a team that they can roll out, 8, 9, 10 players deep, and you're going to see a compete level that's pretty consistent. And I think that's really what they want to get to. And it looks like, again, early days, it looks like that's the kind of team that they brought together, even with some of their younger guys. I mean, you look at some of their U Sports players that they've drafted and brought in, be that Tay Donald, be that, Lei Tong, who's a player that can jump out of the gym. He comes here from playing at Cape Breton. Jalen Shirley at the point guard spot, coming from UBC Okanagan. So and Aaron Rooms, who they bring back, who's the, Ontario University Player of the Year. I think they might even be able to lean on some of those guys for that compete level and that athleticism. So it's going to be an interesting mix, I think, in terms of the kind of players they've brought in. But that compete, I 100% agree with you. I think if we see that early, I think that's a really good sign for where this team can go.
One player, Doug, that I'm really rooting for is Harry Ainley's Sabri Phillips. Sabri, I've known since he was literally a little kid. Growing up, outstanding player in junior high school, in high school at Harry Ainley. Went south pursuing his dream, but had a couple of serious, and I mean serious, injuries that really, really thwarted his ability to, I think, gain the kind of foothold in a particular program in Division I. He played junior college and Division I at a couple of different schools, but Sabri is on the roster as well. And of course, you're always rooting for the hometown guys, but Sabri in particular, to me, I have a real soft spot in my heart for Sabri Phillip that I hope this will be a springboard for him to get a taste of professional basketball so that he can continue, now that he's healthy, playing as long as his body will allow him.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I mean, a guy who, again, you look at the numbers. He played at Stony Brook last year in the NCAA, didn't play a ton, didn't put up big numbers. And they're looking at him, I think, this year to be a real defensive stopper, a guy that they can put on the floor who, when, you need a big stopper, maybe you need a bit of a momentum shift, he's a guy that can step in. And I think, often younger players that are coming, whether it's coming the, early days at the college or university level or pro, I think when you wrap a really specific role for them, especially when you look at Phillips' situation, as you mentioned, with the injuries and just trying to get his career back on track. I think if you can sort of give a really specific role to a guy, I think that can help a ton. And, so again, he might not be looked at as a guy that's going to put up big numbers for you, but there's some familiarity with him with, their assistant coach is George Hoyt. He was his coach at Harry Ainley. So there's there will be a bit of familiarity obviously there. And yeah, I'm with you. If he can come in and establish himself a little bit, even if he's not putting up big numbers, but he's going to play some minutes for them, I think that's huge, not just for this team, but I think, again, another reflection of where basketball in this community has come from and is going. And like you said, hopefully it can be a springboard for him for a good stay with the Stingers over the long haul and maybe to other pro opportunities in the winter season.
Absolutely. So, Doug, tomorrow you and I, scary as this seems, are going to be behind the microphones as we tip off the season at 4:00 over at Hall D. Now, I apologize for this. Is it the Hive again, or are we still calling it Hall D? Do you know if it's I've heard both.
Yeah, I know. It's a good question. You should probably get I'll see if I can get an answer before we go on the air tomorrow, because you're right. It's changed a few times in the last couple of years, so we should probably get a bit of clarity around that one. But yeah, looking forward to it. I think it's again, looks to be a fun Stingers team that they've put together. And Calgary, again, you've got Ruggsy Miller-Moore, another really solid player in the league, was a Canadian All-Star a year ago. So it's going to be a tough matchup for the Stingers, but I think a great way to start the year, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. To start out with your in-province rival is the best way to go. And for those of you who don't have tickets, go to the Stinger website. You can pick your tickets up. I know it's close to being sold out. Hopefully it's a raucous, sold-out crowd in the midst of this raucous hockey environment and world we're living in. Doug, McLean, thank you so much for joining me this morning, and really looking forward to calling the game with you tomorrow. Have a great Saturday.
You too, Paul. Always happy to join you and look forward to seeing you in the Collins Stingers tomorrow.
Doug McLean joining me today. We'll be calling the play-by-play of the Edmonton Stingers versus the Calgary Surge tomorrow, 4 p.m. over in Hall D at the Expo Center. We're going to take a break right now, and then it's closing time with Ryan and Paul here on your sports leader, Sports 1440. I did look for a Linda Ronstadt song that had closing in the title, but I couldn't find one. And, of course, I was almost relieved, because I love the theme of closing time for our show, but I love just playing that song every week because Leonard Cohen's closing time is just amazing. Love the
1992.
music. 1992. Great video, too, by the way. Paul Sir, Ryan Reed, bringing you down the stretch run on the basketball show on Sports 1440. All right, we've got games today. First of all, we've got the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks. Boston is down 0-2. They absolutely cuffed it. And this is different in my mind, Ryan, than the way that the Nuggets lost in Game 2, where they got absolutely crushed, because you're able to separate the fact that you just were awful that day and the other team was just on fire. And you're able to close that chapter, I think, a lot more than when you're looking at having lost 2 games that you absolutely, unequivocally have no possible rational reason for losing.
I actually asked ChatGPT, what do the Knicks have to do to continue their winning ways?
Oh my
and we'll
God.
see if you agree.
Okay.
Is that fair?
You bet.
So they said, number 1, leverage defensive dominance. So they said Mitchell Robinson has been a defensive force, limiting Boston's high-powered offense when he's on the court, and is saying his presence has drastically reduced the Celtics' scoring efficiency.
Yes.
And they said to maintain OG Anunoby's defensive excellence. They said to capitalize on Karl-Anthony Towns' versatility, to utilize Jalen Brunson's clutch scoring, and to enhance team chemistry and execution. How do you feel about Coach ChatGPT in the building?
Oh, he sucks. But, I mean, yes, the first 2 weren't bad. Mitchell Robinson, his statistics are, scoring-wise, are not consequential at all. In fact, I don't know if you saw the free throw he missed the other night.
That was tough.
Man, oh, man.
I think the commentator, he was like, oh, my God.
It was
Took him by surprise.
It was a great response, but it barely touched the bottom of the net, didn't even come anywhere close to the rim. But his defensive presence has done just as Coach Chat just said, reduce the offensive efficiency, especially in the paint. He has either blocked shots or changed shots, which really has had a detrimental effect on the Celtics. But we go back to the fact that the Celtics shoot so many threes, and it's a fly high, fall fast, live and die by the sword sort of scenario that you create for yourself, if that is what you're committed to.
You don't have to live and die by the sword. You can change if it doesn't work. That's the thing.
And it's so stupid not to change. You cannot tell me there is any, even the nerds with the pen pockets and the horn rim glasses sitting in their basement and with one dark light hanging over their 50 computers, even they would admit you got to make a change once in a while.
That's quite the imagery there.
I know. I as you can tell, I find analytics somewhat annoying.
Somewhat. You just painted like a picture of like Jeff Dahmer there.
Didn't mean to. I was thinking more of Gene Hackman in what was the name of it with Will Smith? But anyway, I think the Boston has to adapt, and I'm sure they will. Mazzulla's no fool, and I really have a lot of respect for Joe Mazzulla, not just in terms of his coaching ability as a very young man, because I think he's 35, but also as a man of character. And he has stated many times, you live one day to the next when you're the head coach of an NBA team, and you have to take every practice, every game seriously, because you know your tenure could be over at any minute if you screw up. So you know the Boston Celtics.
Did you feel the same way in the ACAC?
Oh my gosh, the pressure was immense. It was almost insurmountable. I get palpitations just thinking about that right now. So tongue firmly in cheek. So let's jump over to the Timberwolves and the Golden State Warriors. Ryan, now, I mean, the obvious statement is that, they got to hit shots and blah, blah, blah. What does Golden State have to do to be Denver-like to take a heavily favored team and find a way to win in their next game against a very strong, physically strong and healthy Minnesota Timberwolves, and Golden State being without their absolute heart, soul, and superstar, Steph Curry.
Guess who I asked for tips here?
Oh my gosh, what did Chat have
Let's see what ChatGPT says here. So they said leverage emerging talent. I kind of agree with this one. They're saying with Curry sideline, players like Jonathan Kuminga have stepped up. In Game 2, he had 18 points off the bench, showcasing his potential. They say head coach Steve Kerr has expressed confidence in Kuminga's abilities, indicating he'll continue to receive playing time. So maybe that's true. I don't see why not. And then they also said enhance offensive execution with ball movement, efficient shooting, and spacing. Defensive adjustments are key. And to minimize turnovers. That's been Kerr's thing for a long time, I'm pretty sure. He's a huge turnovers and missed shots guy. That's what he focuses on. And then to utilize small ball lineups. The Warriors' death lineup from back in the day, from featuring Draymond Green at center, has been effective. And they're saying to continue to do that, increasing pace, enhancing shooting, and defensive versatility. How do you feel about Coach ChatGPT?
Coach Chat was pretty good on that one. I think, in particular, point number one has validity because the other night, Kuminga showed that he can play. And I think what Coach Chat forgot was Curry had no confidence in Kuminga up until he absolutely had to go to him. But Kuminga is a player that the Golden State Warriors really thought was one of their stars of the future. And this year, due to injuries and other factors that I don't think we're privy to, Kuminga has not had the impact on this franchise that people thought he might have.
Draft him over Franz Wagner.
Yeah.
Like their next pick.
Oof. Wow. Love to have that one back. Yeah. But Kuminga, here's the thing. Will this franchise stick with this player? Because his talent level is far greater than Wagner's is. But it's the question of taking that talent and converting it into an NBA basketball player's capacity, and that really remains to be seen. However, the Warriors are going to need to go to him. I also think we need tonight to see playoff Jimmy. He has to be more of a force than he was in game 2. He was kind of quiet that night, and I think you have to give some credit to the Timberwolves for making life uncomfortable for Jimmy Butler. Draymond Green, the other day I saw a headline that Draymond's sick of being portrayed as an angry man by the media, but how do you not portray an angry man as an angry man? He's a very angry guy, and he expresses it so profusely while he's playing. He's always in danger of 2 technicals and being ejected by his overstatement of his rage against the officials.
There was an interesting point made by Emmanuel Acho on, I forget what show, but he's talking about, Draymond said he's portrayed as an angry black man in society. And obviously I'll tread carefully here as a white guy, but Emmanuel Acho said that it's unfair to the trope of the actual angry black man in society, how he's portrayed, because he said Draymond's just a dirty basketball player. That's what he said. He said, enough. You're not an angry black man, you're a dirty basketball player.
You're fair.
And it's unfair of him to say that for the people that have faced that in society. But I'll look it up yourself. It's kind of weird.
I saw that quote too. I was staying away from it, but on the other hand, I think it's better to just address it properly and respectfully. I agree with that summary. He is a dirty basketball player who uses his emotions to try to intimidate the officials and upset opponents. And you can always talk about, well, that's just Draymond. And yes, that is true. But he's so over the top, and at times in essence, he cost. You can make a strong argument. He cost the Warriors a championship when he got ejected from the game, and LeBron James.
3-1, yeah.
Yeah, they were down 3-1, and without Draymond, they came back and won the series.
Was it game 5 or 6 he was suspended? I think it was, is it 6?
I think it was game 5.
Game 5? Okay.
Yeah, I think they were up 3-1 on the Lakers, and then game 5 he was suspended. Well, maybe it could have been game 6. I don't remember. You're right. But anyway, he gets so ridiculously carried away as a physical/dirty player that sometimes he gets caught for it, and then he expresses his outrage. So there's a real simple way of taking that that reputation away, and that is how you conduct yourself on the court. So no pity whatsoever for Draymond Green. But I think the key to me is their small ball lineup with contributions from a variety of players led by Jimmy Butler and Buddy Hield hitting open threes and creating open threes.
Kings legend, Buddy Hield.
Buddy Hield. Had to get that in there. But that's what's going to drive this. And the Timberwolves, if they play their game, should win not just this game, but should win the rest of the games in the series because they are healthy, they are bigger, they are stronger, they have some talents that Golden State, no matter what they do with a smaller lineup or a bigger lineup, are going to have a hard time with. And then but a lot of it will hinge on which Anthony Edwards shows up.
Because he was banged up at the end of the last game, right? But there was a report saying today that he was not on the injury report.
Yep.
So he'll not be fine, but he's cleared to play 100%.
Yeah, and I would think like he is a competitor. He has a lot of pride in his game, and I think, like you pointed out early in the show, he has demonstrated that he can play at a very high elite level when the playoffs come. And I am sure he's looking to redeem himself because for the first time, I think you could really see self-doubt creeping into the way that Anthony Edwards played. Well, that wraps the show up for this week. Ryan Reed, thank you so much. Real quickly, I am assuming Jokic was the player in the poll?
Yeah, I know Shea surpassed him.
He did. Okay.
I'll look at the exact numbers here right now.
Okay.
So the official numbers at the end were Shea Gilgeous 47.9%, Jokic 45.8%. And Tyrese at 6.3%, and Donovan Mitchell with 0.
I didn't convince anybody to go for Donovan.
It wasn't like 20 people voted.
Job.
There was a decent chunk of people that voted, and Donovan Mitchell did not receive a vote.
Well, that's okay. I didn't do the good sales job. In the meanwhile, in honor of my son Ben, who we lost 2 years ago, please treat each other with kindness. You never know what your fellow man is going through. So think the best of your fellow man and treat them with kindness and look for ways to help anyone who's in need of help whenever you can. In the meanwhile, have a great week on and off the court. Stingers tomorrow, NBA playoffs. We'll look forward to next weekend here on the Basketball Show with Paul and Ryan on your sports leader, Sports 1440.